Hi, everybody. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. Okay, my name is Federico Cinalli. I'm Client Solutions Architect and VMware Instructor, okay? So, well, unfortunately, we don't have enough time to disclaimer. Starting with metrics. When it comes to managing any kind of vSAN cluster, the most important part is just to be familiar with those metrics. But first of all, we have to know what are the tools that we have to use in order to get those metrics, okay? So, in the first order, we have vSphere client. You know that the vSphere client comes with the vSAN health check embedded in that solution, all right? Then we have the Ruby vSphere console, which is another tool which is embedded in the vCenter solution. It doesn't matter if we are using vCenter Server for Windows or the vCenter Server appliance. Then we have the Virtualized Operations Manager, the management pack for vSAN. This is a must in any deployment. Plus, the virtualized login site content pack for vSAN, which is another must, especially for troubleshooting. Okay, so please don't forget that. And of course, we don't need to forget the use of Power CLI. Okay, this is another important tool. So this list that we have here, it's a reference. I think that this is a good point to start, but of course it depends on what type of problems we have, okay? If we have issues for networking, if we have performance issues, okay? So I think one more time, this is a good point to start. Please pay attention on the best practices. Then we have the what if. When we work with vSAN, you know that we manage the vSAN, actually the virtual machine objects with vSAN based on the virtual machine storage policy, based on those policy rules. So if we have a failure, then we have to provide the minimum amount of resources in order to work in compliance mode with those objects and components, all right? So sometimes we may see that, or we can think that we are fine in terms of those resources. But using these commands, look at that, Ruby vSphere console, or even ESX CLI, because sometimes we have a problem with our vCenter server, and it is possible to use ESX CLI in order to confirm that we are fine in terms of the minimum amount of resources in order to provide those storage resources for our virtual machine components, okay? So please pay attention here in this best practice. Don't use the minimum amount of hosts based on our virtual machine storage policies. Why is that? Because if we just put one host in maintenance mode, then we won't have the minimum amount of resources to continue working in compliance with those virtual machine objects, all right? So let's move to hardware compatibility. You know, rule number one, when we are working with vSAN clusters, okay, we have to be in compliance with those hardwares. And, but the problem here is that, let's say that we are working with vSAN-ready nodes, or why not VxRail, okay? For sure, those pieces of hardware will be ready to use, ready to deploy, in compliance in terms of drivers and firmwares, not just for the hardware, if not for the controllers, plus the firmwares of the disks, okay? But the problem is when we upgrade that vSAN cluster, okay? So before we upgrade that vSAN cluster, there is that we have to check the compatibility for that current hardware that we have, okay? Please be careful there, even especially in the firmwares for the disks, okay, which is a key. Okay, network performance. The kind of issues that we may have with network performance, with network resources, may be different, okay? It's possible to have a network partition, it's possible to have a poor performance for those components, and of course, it's possible to see a host isolated, okay? So we have just a few checklists, but the check number one on my list is the dropped packets, send packets, drop packets, okay? What can we use in order to get that metrics? one more time, ESX top. It's possible to work with Power CLI and, of course, virtualized login site and virtualized operations manager. The best practice for VSAN networking is very easy because, first of all, we have to know what are the amount of VM NICs that we are using. For example, are we sharing VM NICs for VSAN and some others VM kernel groups? If yes, then the best practice is to use virtual distributed switches plus network I/O control. There is where we have to configure, we have to set the reservation for VSAN, okay? Reservation, and we have to set a custom value for shares, all right? Don't forget to use quality of service for the network devices, all right? And then there's another best practice. One VSAN cluster, one VLAN. Another VSAN cluster, another VLAN, okay? This is another recommendation. And of course, for best practice, we have an amazing resource, which is the best practice document for networking in VSAN, okay? And of course, for free. Okay, VSAN components resynchronizing. After a failure, after we change our policy, and based on the VSAN storage policy rules, the VSAN cluster have to recreate components, okay? The depending amount of virtual machines that we are working in that particular cluster, then we may see an impact on the performance of those virtual machines, okay? So this is very, very important because before an upgrade, before we change policy, for example, we have to check if in that VSAN cluster we are working with resynchronizing tasks in background, okay? So please, take it as an important recommendation, okay? What can we use in order to check that? One more time, vSphere Client, Ruby vSphere Console, or Power CLI. Okay. VSAN host and KMS clusters. You know that since vSphere 6.5, it's possible to work with two different solutions in order to increase the security for our virtual machines. On one hand, we have the virtual machines encryption, and on the other hand, we have the vSAN encryption, okay? The vCenter server has to be integrated with a KMS cluster, usually using IP address, okay? And after that, the vCenter server will request a key encryption key for all those hosts. In the case of the vSAN, only one key encryption key, all right? For security reasons, those hosts will store on memory those key encryption keys. Okay, what's the problem here, okay? The problem is in case of general outage, let's say that all those hosts are powered off, and at that point, when we power on again those hosts have to be able to reach those KMS clusters, because are the hosts in vSAN the ones that will request those KMS, those key encryption keys. What if those hosts don't have those key encryption keys? Those hosts won't be able to power on those machines. Think about it, okay? It's very important. Okay, host membership. This is a little strange potential situation, but sometimes it's possible to see in the UI that host has a member of the cluster, but that hosts are not providing storage resources for that vSAN cluster, okay? So it's possible to check that if that host, one or more hosts are really members of that vSAN cluster running this command, okay? All right, then stretch clusters. You know that what are the minimum requirements for stretch clusters? 10 gigabit Ethernet network and a maximum of 5 milliseconds round trip, okay, between the main sites for vSAN, all right? So this is another important thing to check. What can we use in order to check that? One more time, vSphere client, vSphere web client, or a third-party system in order to see what is the available bandwidth and the current latency that we are managing at that particular moment, okay? At that point, thinking the impact that we may have. In that case, that will mean a risk. Okay, what about the availability, the available capacity? Okay, this is another must when we are working with vSAN. For every single vSAN cluster, we have to manage a minimum of 25 or 30% of available space. That amount of available space will be used by the vSAN cluster just to provide enough resources to recreate those components after a failure or after we change a policy. This is the minimum amount of space that we have to provide, okay? So at that point, this is a must that we have to check, okay? What can we use? Of course, the slack space, we may use the Power CLI, we may use the vSphere client, okay? And last but not least, we have here the main VSAN Best Practices, okay? And now the question is, are we following the VSAN Best Practices? Just this super important, especially for new vSAN clusters, and even more important to our current vSAN clusters, okay? So this is fantastic to check every single line here in this list of best practice just to be in compliance with our vSAN, okay? So this is it. Thank you so much. Hope to see you again.